So this session, we're going to talk about building out customer success during explosive growth. And it's meant to be a panel, so please make sure you have your questions ready, because you know panels are only fun when there's interesting questions from the audience. And without further ado, I'm going to just let my esteemed colleagues here introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the explosive growth that they have both seen at their various companies. But first, why don't we start with introductions? So take it away, Sean.
So I'm Sean White, Vice President of Global Customer Experience at Dynatrace. Good enough introduction?
Perfect,
Good.
works for me, okay.
I'm Michael Getz. I'm the GM of Customer Outcomes at GitHub.
Okay, great. Now, maybe a little bit more about your background. So
Yeah.
how long have you been in the roles, you
Yeah.
know, and is this kind of your first customer success role? Are you, in a real industry veteran? How do you think about that?
I wouldn't call myself an industry veteran, but so I've been at GitHub since about December 2020. I was the first, I would say, true CS hire at GitHub, which is kind of fascinating. GitHub's been around since 2009. So it's been a while. Before that, I was at AWS for a while doing customer engagements. Before that, I was at a startup called Chef Software, Opscode, for any of you in the IT sector. Probably know what that one is. So, but yeah, I built customer success and professional services at Opscode, did customer engagements at Amazon, and then came to GitHub, kind of felt a lot closer to the Opscode work that I did before.
Yeah, so I came from the technical side of the house. I ran DevOps teams before they were called DevOps. And I had an opinion on support, and they said, oh, great, you can run support. And then after doing that successfully for a while, I said, I have an opinion on customer success. And then at some point they said, you can try to do that too. And that was about 7 years ago. And so I kind of made the pivot to customer success. And then now the goal that we've been trying to is how do we bring all of that together as opposed to operating in independent silos. Yeah.
Right, great. Okay, so now maybe talk a little bit about the explosive growth that you've seen. Maybe tell us a little bit about the start and kind of where you are now. Just give, I think, people in the audience a bit of context for, the issues that you've been facing, what you've been trying to deal with.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I'm earlier on the journey here. So GitHub does everything very fast. Development is very fast. We ship changes very fast. The growth is very fast. The company is still growing. It's a pretty large company as it is. It's still growing 40% year over year. And so when we decided to do customer success, they brought me on. They said, okay, please plant some customer success in our organization. And that was about as much guidance as I was given. They said, we don't really have a retention problem. We don't really have a growth problem, but we really want some customer success. And so that was a pretty fun one to unpack, right? I got budget for 10 people when I came in. They had already pre-selected my candidates, and so there was like, here's your array of candidates that we've already pre-selected for you. And pretty quickly realized that those candidates were probably not going to be successful because GitHub's a very technical product. And so our conversations get very deep technically, and we have a challenge of also being a platform. And so when we get into these larger deals, having a CSM that can manage the business and have the depth of technical depth they need to go on, I could find maybe 24 of them and pay a lot for each of them, right? And so it wasn't a scalable model. So we did a quick pivot within 3 months and decided to triple the size of the team. So then I had 30 headcount to hire instead of 10. So we started cranking through that and working pretty well. And then just recently, so then we grabbed on a customer experience team, a digital automation team, and this is all within the span of about 9 months. And so, and I just got a new round of investment yesterday. So, yeah, so that if I'm trying to paint a picture of rapid growth of the business, but it's translating very quickly into rapid growth of building a CS. So we are literally building the functionality, the process, the playbooks. We had nothing when I walked in the door. Where we go.
Okay, great. And Sean?
Yeah, I think maybe before talking about the explosive growth of our CS organization, talk about the company just a bit for some context. So, so Dynatrace helps companies, accelerate their digital transformation through an observability platform. A lot of marketing buzzwords, but basically we give, insights into the health of the infrastructure, the application, and user behavior of their applications. It's pretty technical, just like
Yep.
you guys are, right? And so we went through this journey of, from a on-premise, perpetual business to a SaaS business, and said, well, gee, could this work? Can we just throw data at it and have a bunch of people be growth hackers? And we realized that didn't actually help because customers actually want relationships. And so we said, well, we need to pivot completely, and we brought on board a couple of CSMs. And then, fast forward a couple years, and then the pandemic happened. And the whole idea of digital transformation, the accelerating it, just exploded for our customers. And we're a customer-driven organization, so as customers grow and their ARR grows, directly translated into my hiring model. And so, during the pandemic, our team, grew 2x, 3x in that time, and we're talking now the team is about 350 people. That includes both technical and non-technical roles. But started out 4 years ago with 16 people. And so largely as a result of the growth of the industry, but the pandemic really just totally accelerated it for us.
I guess so a key theme that seems to be coming through here are the challenges around building a team
Yeah.
and hiring the people. Because, what's very clear from both of you is that you didn't have the problem of convincing your CFO to give you headcount.
It's a good problem to have.
Because I'm sure she gave it to you anyway, right? So you got that. So anyway, in all seriousness, so yes, that's one of the things that came through when I was talking to both of you as well. It was like the issue isn't so much about, a lot of times we'll get a lot of questions from folks who'll say, well, what about the ROI? How'd you get the heads? This was not your guys' problem. Your problem was the business was growing dramatically and you were just trying to keep up. Okay, so how'd you do it? What decisions did you make and what infrastructure did you put in place and, how many times did you fail? Let's hear it all.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so our challenge was, and it continues to be our challenge today, is hiring amazing talent. Now, good news is we have amazing talent, so then it becomes, retaining amazing talent.
Yeah.
But early on, our challenge was just hiring, and we were hiring so quickly because our customers needed the help, right? And we needed them to be successful, that we actually, and if in retrospect, we were talking earlier, if I would have changed anything, but in the midst of all that hiring and onboarding, or trying our best to onboard, we sort of failed at putting into scaffolding, the process, the tooling. Gosh, if we could have brought into Tango 2 years earlier, it would have been a lot better than where we are today. And so only now we're having to catch up in a lot of those areas, despite having to hire another 200 people next year in our team. And so one of the things that we did a year ago was actually build an operations team. And I've heard others say that should be some of your best or your first set of hiring. I kind of wish I had that advice a couple years ago, because we're now having to play catch up on that. But at the same time, I say it's not an easy choice because we had customers coming in the door, they needed help, and we wanted to help them. But that was one of our earliest challenges today.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Luckily, we caught it a little bit sooner before, being able to, we just got our funding for the operations team about a year in, so not too far behind. But I'd echo exactly that. I think for hiring, we have been pretty successful, and a lot of that had to do with our networks, about people. I brought in some leaders that I'd worked with before, and then they tapped their networks, and then their networks tapped their networks, and that worked out pretty well for us. The other thing that we did was we focused a lot on, so CS is kind of a spectrum, and people have different approaches towards CS, and sometimes it's very sales-oriented, sometimes very support-oriented, and we had a very specific culture we wanted to build. And so when I brought the leaders on, what we did was we focused less about, are the people we're bringing on, do they know GitHub, right? Do they know the DevOps space, the CI/CD space? Do they know any of that? Or do they understand the culture we're trying to build, and have they tried to build it before? And so we found builders, which again goes with our core culture at GitHub, is we have a lot of builders. So we hired builders, people that kind of align to that culture, and that really helped amplify, because what really accelerated our hiring was when you get about 10 or 12 people that are kind of the same in terms of the same culture, their networks just is like an amplifying effect. And so we've actually been pretty okay in keeping up with the hiring process. But exactly what you described in terms of the scaffolding, it didn't exist when I showed up, and then it still doesn't really exist. And we're kind of telling people, hey, build your onboarding when you come on. In fact, the first 12 hires was, I don't have an onboarding plan for you, so read a bunch of things, and then write down what you wish you would have known. And then it was like an iterative building onboarding plan of, okay, the next person came in, we answered these questions, all right, what did you miss, right? And so we've now gone into, we have a structured onboarding plan, We have the next hurdle we're aiming for is the sort of retraining. So we've only been around for about a year. We just had our first 1-year anniversary for a CSM. And we realized that some of the 1-year anniversary CSMs went out in the field and they started working, but they missed all the learnings that we learned about onboarding. They're like, well, when did we learn how to do that, right? And so we're kind of going back to check to catch them up right now. So
Right, so I guess it sounds like one of the challenges is just the ongoing iteration
Yeah.
of the various programs, right? So in this case, we're talking about an onboarding program for internal hires, not an onboarding program for your customers specifically, but
100%.
you're still bringing in that same culture of rapid iteration
Yep.
there, and then how do you make sure that, the folks that have been in the company already are there?
Yep.
I do see that as well at Tatango, yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
We're trying to tackle that same challenge. In our operations team, we actually have 3 enablement specialists or enablement managers by region. So they're in theater with the different regions. And we have plans to double that team this year to try to bring on board a more prescriptive, continuous enablement of the teams specifically for that reason. So.
Now, have you had any challenges around finding headcount? Not in terms of getting it, obviously, from your CFOs, but rather meaning, okay, we're going to go for a low-cost location because, we want to get people of a certain type, or have you been just recruiting everywhere? Maybe speak to some of those challenges.
Yeah, I subscribe to the fact of I want the person, not the location. I mean, we're a pretty remote first company. Time zones help, right? We want to try to align closer to where our customers actually are. So that's pretty much our only guiding principle in terms of the location. We try to measure towards a very specific compa ratio for the levels, and we have all that mapped out. I think one of the biggest challenges is really, I think more difficult for us is hiring in APAC right now. It's a smaller market for our segment, and then it's also a different engagement model. And so we're looking at different ways to sort of say, okay, if we go to APAC, do we really need to have that same global consistency staffing model, or do we lean more on partners, right? And is that strategy? And so we're kind of iterating through some of those models now.
Yeah, I think, what we've done is we have, probably most of you have done, we have different levels of CSMs that are assigned to ARR cohorts based on seniority and value and all that good stuff. And actually for us, finding, talented, CSMs at, say, the early levels, let's say 1, 2, and even 3, hasn't been that challenge. For us, it's actually been finding those very senior level CSMs that bring in the industry knowledge, because in our industry, there's no education out there on, observability. Right, and so it just doesn't exist. And so trying to bring in individuals who know how to navigate IT organizations, have C-level conversations, those kinds of things, be strategic in their thinking and planning, they're really hard to find. And so we've had to expand out our reach to be much more remote, and which actually aligns to our field. So we put a lot of our senior or strategic level CSMs out in the field, and then sort of our entry level, we sort of bring them closer to home base. As they progress in their career, then maybe send them out. So, but that's been our biggest challenge.
Okay, let me switch gears to a new topic. I hope you guys are getting ready with your own topics. So, do you manage your customer journey as a product? What do you think about that concept that's been introduced today?
No.
Silence.
It resonated with me a lot. I will be honest with you. I will say one thing about GitHub culture is if you can define anything as a product, you get a lot more sort of alignment and people will get it. Yeah. One of the biggest things we were struggling with is communicating CS and why is it important. We're doing a lot of change management. I think positioning it more as a product will help, I think, with some of the organizations we have. So it's definitely something we're going to explore.
Yeah, and I think I love the concept, right? Because really to do it well, it requires a full 360 approach from the company cross-functionally. Mm-hmm. And at Dynatrace, we're heavy R&D product-focused business, right? At some point, I love the idea that someone mentioned earlier, CS being part of the R&D product organization. That's kind of an interesting concept for us. But I would say that, that might be a challenge for us in particular. Mm-hmm. But I love the idea of it. And I'm going to try to take that back and see how we can incorporate it.
Okay, so let me push on that a little further. So I know for you, for example, which version of customer success are you guys on now?
Expand on that a little bit.
Meaning the first version, the second version was the
pod.
pod.
Oh, I see. Iteration, yeah. So we're probably going to be going to what we call our version 3. So when we first started our program, which we call Dynatrace 1, which is like one team, one one team, one dream kind of concept, which is the idea of trying to bring together traditionally disparate, siloed post-sales customer organizations into one. So, you think sales, renewals, success, support, services. Traditionally, they're separate. Traditionally, they're managed by different objectives that oftentimes conflict with each other. Think of services being driven by margin and utilization rates, right? And then think of success as just help, right? So we try to bring all that into one. And we had this pod concept that was, here's a cohort of customers, 200 customers per pod of 4 people, cross-functional, and then once you had 201 customers, break apart, split off into 2 pods and 3 pods and 4 pods. And when we were going through this explosive growth, we ended up with 25 pods. And then we said, well, gee, there's a pod lead or a squad lead. Well, who's the manager of all that? And how do I drive a consistent program across 25 pods? So we reshuffled the decks, and we came up with what we're introducing as a version 2 model of a more functional-based organization where there's traditional CS, but they're closely aligned and attached at the hip with this technical product experts. We're going to eventually probably calling them, CSEs or customer success engineers at some point. And version 3 is what we're looking through now is a pure franchise model, which completely aligns with our sales organization, so that now we have our AEs, our sales organization, closely aligned to our technical and post-sales success resources, glued at the hip, so they're doing territory planning, account planning, QBRs, all together. And at some future stage might even have, incentives tied to that. But that's sort of our next iteration, because we want to be, whether it's whole product, but at least we want this whole customer lifecycle journey to be unified with our sales org. So that's version 3 that we're working on now.
Okay, great. And so how about sales? So this is definitely another theme that kind of came up earlier, right? Who owns the renewal? How do you think about the upsell? How do you work with the sales organization? All this. I think there's really no wrong answers here but it's interesting that every single customer success event I've been at of this type, it always comes up every time. People are struggling with this. So how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, it's been very interesting because our sales organization, when I came in, I said we didn't have customer success, but we did. It's just the sellers were doing it, and they were doing it poorly. And not for their own, like they didn't know what to do, it's they had too much other things going on. And so what's been interesting is the sales team that I have that I partner with at GitHub, it's actually one of the best sales teams I've worked with, right? They generally want to help the customer. They are driven by their quota and their incentives, but they are also willing to just roll up their sleeves and kind of catch and do the work if they have to. So we've been scaling out the organization. One of the challenges has been communicating to the sales team, hey, this is what CS is, this is what we can do, and this is sort of like how we collaborate. Because our sales partners view everything in sort of a factory line, and so it's like, okay, I stop here, and then the CS people, and so what exactly are you going to do, and when do, and so it's an iterative process going through that with them, but it's really important that we're tightly aligned. Our sellers also do sort of the franchise model, and one of the things that we're experimenting with now is how do we align to those territories? Because I think it's really most important is to align to the sales territories to allow the teams to function at that level, but maintain sort of connection to the top or consistency across from a global perspective. Otherwise, you end up with very different outcomes in different regions that may or may not be what you're trying to get at the global level. So for example, one of our regions might be lower on gross retention, but higher on expansion, and then another region might be doing great on the others. And what I don't want is for them to create their CS program just about securing the gross retention and forgetting the expansion. So.
Yeah, we have a renewals organization that's part of our Dynatrace One program. So they're unified in that sense, who focus primarily on packaging, pricing, a lot of the transactional stuff. And when things get a little shaky, they do involve the CSM and the sales team. The one area that we programmatically build into our program, and now Tatango's driving it, is our risk assessments that we do. So we do a standardized 6-month and 3-month risk assessment. And we have customers that renew every quarter because they have multiple buying groups, and so that's kind of a continuous process for us. And that allows them to sort of be part of that process today. And so I sort of try to tell the team, I say, your role in the renewal is to assess and mitigate risk. And so that's to understand if there is risk, obviously, and then if there is, to actually put together a plan to, mitigate that risk. and then to basically be the quarterback for the rest of the organization as it relates to that account. So.
Right, and you guys are both great companies who are doing super well. And one of the things that I think comes through very clearly from the conversation is you're very collaborative, right? So there isn't a lot of, from both these guys, you don't really get a lot of that siloed feeling of like, I'm customer success, or I'm sales, or I'm whatever, in there. So people you can see are kind of reaching across to their brethren to try and, like even the pod model as an example, right? To make it kind of happen. And so I think that this question of collaboration, though, is an ongoing challenge, especially at scale, which you both have dealt with. So how do you think about that? How do you scale it up when you've got you're trying to pull people in from a variety of functions, and then now doing this, faster, quicker, and way more times?
Yeah, so collaboration is a pretty core motion for me and my leadership team right now. GitHub is a collaboration company. I mean, it's built on collaborating. It's the whole purpose. What I've noticed is that because the rest of GitHub is growing at the same pace, you have this natural inclination when a new function comes in and a leader comes in, you kind of like grab, okay, what's my part of the land, right? And you do this like sort of dance until you figure out how to collaborate. So about every quarter, there's a new sort of function that pops up, and I try to just be open and welcoming and try to, hey, let me help you be a signpost in the organization. Let me tell you what I'm doing. A couple of times it's frictionful because there's a misalignment at the top as to what you're responsible for. So there might be some conflict, but I just try to address that head on and say, hey, this is what I'm doing right now. If you want to do that or collaborate with me and we can support the same goals, that's great. If you think I shouldn't be doing this activity and you want to do that activity, let's talk it out and let's figure out what it makes sense. At the end of the day, it's about the investments that GitHub is making. Are they in the right place, and do you have those people doing the things you want them to do, right? Do you want sellers driving adoption, or do you want CS driving adoption, which is more cost effective, right? So having those conversations really helps kind of ground the collaboration discussions as they go. But I will say about every quarter a new team pops up and it's like, here we go again. All right, so let me orient what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I can say, I mean, collaboration is like the lifeblood for us, especially being cross-functional, and now even more so being so virtual as we are. I mean, we do all the typical things with Slacks and Zooms and all that. I think, for us, it's actually, for me personally too, it's been more of a challenge during COVID, because part of our culture in our organization previous to COVID was we would travel to our offices all the time. It was just normal, and so you'd have these interactions and collisions and building relationships that was just very difficult to do during COVID. Even though it's only a Zoom call away, it just seemed to be so hard to hit that call button sometimes, right? And so I'd say that's probably been more of a challenge recently. But what's been great to see is when we do, coming back out, going to our offices again, seeing the collaboration pick up just as where it was before has been very good. One of the things that we're looking to do more now is through this operations team, because we are trying to move to this franchise model, which means that there's no single head of CS or support, right? We're pushing and empowering the teams locally in these regions to sort of do what's right for their organization. But the struggle will be, well, how do we maintain consistency of programs? If I want to roll out a success block, how do I make sure everyone's on alignment to it and people don't moan about it, right, if they don't like it? And so we're trying to build up this operations team to build those relationships, to identify stakeholder groups. We're getting really good at running pilot programs and getting iterative kind of feedback and incorporating that. I wouldn't say we're perfect yet, but that's another way of doing it and making people feel like they're included in the process so that when they have an idea, they know where to go, it's being heard, and they feel like they own this process, beyond just someone from the top down pushing it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Questions from the audience. I don't want to take up all the time because I can continue on here and ask these guys many questions. Go right ahead.
So Michael, you mentioned the challenge that you have to find a CSM that will understand enough to be technical, and that's exactly the challenge I'm facing. So I wanted to hear, how did you solve it? Are they dealing with the upsells and renewal? Are they just dealing with more active support?
Yeah, I gave up, basically is what it was. I said, look, honestly, what was happening was I was trying to find a deep technical expert that had history and was able to be that technical consultant around the platform that we were building, that also would have that business conversation and talk about what are your objectives, how do these align to your business and the value. And I think I found 3 people right? And I have a pretty deep network in the DevOps space. And so I just said, let's just split the role into two. I'd rather have a technical partner, right? And we call them customer success architects, and they partner with customer success managers. They both are measured by the same incentive structure, so they're both focused on retention and usage and adoption. However, one has very clear activities of, I'm going to help you figure out how to solve this problem technically, and how do I connect the technical solution to your business objective. The CSM is very focused on what's the end-to-end health of the customer, what's blocking them, how are the product feedback, how's that working, sort of the management of the account. So we ended up splitting it that way. So it's a little bit more expensive, but you know, that's where we're at now. I would say if we had to, as we go down the scale, we're actually peeling off the customer success manager, but we don't actually let go of the customer success architect role. So we need to go down because our customers are very technical. And so as we can peel back on the account management activities, they'll always have questions, right? And having some technical person just answer the technical question for them seems to be super valuable to kind of keep those lower tiers going. So.
Right. And the architects, are they proactive or they just react?
Yeah, they're proactive. So it's right now it's a paired model. So you think about like in a sales model, you have a seller and a solution engineer for like technical sales. Same thing, just put it after the sale. It's kind of how we do it.
And we did the exact same thing. We actually started out with the technical team. We called them technical product experts or product consultants. I think the one thing that we did that I think is somewhat unique is we opened up in-product assistance, AKA chat, and those same experts are in chat with our customers. So they're trained to be consultants, not support. So which means that their objective is to continue the conversation.
Yep.
So, and to plant seeds of value along the way. And then they take that intelligence that we can take back and put it into our systems.
Yep.
And so we actually have right now, it was originally a 4-to-1 ratio of technical to CSM. Now it's a 2-to-1 ratio. Yep. I think over time it's going to become a 1-to-1 ratio as we introduce this new CSE concept along with our technical product experts. So.
And so you thematically there, I think what we can kind of call out from what you're just saying is this concept of just constantly delivering value.
Yeah.
Right? So, figuring out, okay, what's going to make the customer successful? What does the customer need? Find ways to give it to them in a way that is efficient and scalable for your business model and something that, drives the ROI.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
2 more questions.
Okay.
Wrap up.
Hey, so how is Tatango helping you manage your team or your teams and helping them manage themselves?
Good. Well, I'll start out since we got to Tango a year ago, and we had 3 basic objectives. And hopefully I had these written down a year ago, so I'm trying to go off of memory now. But for us, it was managing tasks, right? Initially, right? And sort of that was like number 1 for us, was managing the tasks. Providing customer insight was number 2. So say proactive insight, managing workflow management or tasks, and then providing managers the ability to drive accountability down, right? And so those were the 3 criteria that we had for us. And we had actually built our own customer insights platform. Our own, it still drives a lot of what we do. And we're now feeding that data into Tatango to drive customer health and a few other pretty cool things. But it was really that. And I would say of those 3, it was that workflow management piece, problem, if then else, drive a behavior with our CSMs, and then the accountability so managers can follow up and CSMs can do it themselves.
Great.
Yeah, I would say that, so we're still pretty early on, but our general philosophy is, so we hired a lot of senior folks, and what I really focused them on was, I have very specific outcomes I want you to deliver. How you deliver it, we're learning, right? I want to know what you do that is actually moving the needle for the outcomes we're trying to drive. And so we focused on getting the data in first into Tatango. So that customer OS sort of resonates with me a lot because we're at that stage, right? We're just getting everything together so we can have a customer-centric view. And then we're learning how to manage the CSMs, I guess is the best way to describe it, based off of the actions they're taking. And hey, what does good look like? And then let's do that and then measure that instead of trying to dump a bunch of tasks in on them.
Yeah, and Ravit's talking tomorrow, our head of product, and she'll, I hope, be talking about some of the work we're doing with outcome success plans, which speaks right to what Michael's talking about here. Go ahead.
I was just really curious. You were talking about only recently getting CS Ops and only recently getting a CS tool. and yet having 350 CSMs in your organization,
Uh-huh.
and my mind is blown. And so I was just sort of curious, what was that realization? Like, when did you start to think about that? And do you see a time when you wouldn't throw more bodies at it, but you might look for other ways to deliver the customer journey, but still effectively, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's great. And yeah, my mind blown as well. I think if I were to say, what to do first, it's getting customer intelligence, that telemetry that we were talking about earlier today. Again, we built that solution. So we sort of had checkbox number 1 done. We built a whole solution. We have our own kind of, customer intelligence platform, right? So we use our own product in that sense. The problem with that, though, it didn't drive the other things that we needed, right? Like accountability, workflow management, prescriptive, success blocks, and those kinds of things. And so we got along, I'm surprised we got along as far as we did using just customer intelligence and really smart CSMs and a management team. But once we got to a certain scale, which is about 100 or so, we're like, no, we really do need to have a program and a system to drive a program to, if we could have measurable outcomes. And because what was happening was I'd have a team in APAC doing something totally different from the team in Europe, and one was working, one may not work. They both working. I'm like, well, why? Because I didn't have a consistent baseline of metrics and processes. And so, so that's what happened.
All right. All right, well, thanks you guys so much for this awesome session, and of course, they'll be around.